Now we'll move into the idea that, as you see up here, location-powered customer experience. What's key about that, I think, and one reason we're talking about it here, is if you think about how technology has come and replaced or displaced or upset or disrupted the previous technology, when we try to understand the new technology, we usually do so through the eyes of the old technology for a while. And then eventually, when we're successful, we understand the new technology in its native form because it can always do something different, better, other than what the previous technology does. One of the unique things about mobile media is the location experience. TV doesn't do it, radio doesn't do it, it doesn't provide that same bit of information. So the uniqueness of using mobile media means the uniqueness of using what's special about it and what's native to it. And that is, how do we use location ability better to power the customer experience? Alan is going to talk to us about that. He is the creator and seller of several companies, and he is going to talk about the mobile experience in relation to location media, but also through the eyes of being an entrepreneur, being an innovator, seeing what's out there and thinking about what you can do about it, how you can bring your ideas to fruition. We have a serial entrepreneur here to talk to us about that. Alan Knitowski, CEO of Phunware. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Pleasure to be here. I want to start by scaring you a little bit because mobile's a cool device, but there's only one person I think that's had a chance to see this. But all of you with an iPhone, pull out your iPhone and go to Settings for me. I just want to show you what you volunteer to people like me to make my job a lot better. When you get in there, go ironically to something called Privacy. So when you hit Privacy, you're going to see Location Services at the top. Hit that. Then you got to scroll all the way to the bottom because when we want to get really good information, we don't want you to know you're volunteering it. So go all the way to the bottom of your apps, and you look for something very obscure said System Services. And then about halfway down, you'll see Frequent Locations. If yours are on, raise your hand. All right, so it looks like a good majority are on. Now click into that. Frequent Locations. It should be right under where you can toggle on, off. It just says either on or off under Frequent Locations right above Product Improvement. And when you go in there now, click on one of those items, and what you're going to find is that this is an index of every aspect of your life, down to when you show up, when you leave, where you go. It's cross-indexed with all your context. By the way, you volunteer all this, so I know when you go to school, when you go home. I know when you're here. I know when you walked in, when you left. I know how much time you spent, what you did while you're here half of the time. And again, you volunteer all of this. The other thing you voluntarily do is you turn on Bluetooth. For those of you that swipe up, you'll see that your Bluetooth is on unless you purposely turn it off. Because every time you update, like iOS 9, it automatically comes back on. So today I'm going to try to help you understand why these things happen, because in the world of free, I can assure you someone has to pay for free. So the interesting part is there's very good uses with location technology. Think of the Phunware logo as a geofence where you enter and exit, indoors and outdoors. And what I'm trying to do is be able to do one-to-one targeting with contextual awareness and location awareness of every single connected device touching the network globally at scale. Meaning that we're creating a Phunware ID for every one of you and every device you own, and anywhere you touch a network or use an application. We know who you are, where you're at, what you're doing, what you like, what you don't like, and then we try to help that brand or that venue create a one-to-one relationship with you so they can know your value to them. Because ironically, as much as we'd all like to sing Kumbaya, if you go to Las Vegas and you walk into the Bellagio casino, they want to know if you like to gamble, not just if you have money. And every brand, when you walk into Starbucks, you have a value. When you walk across the street and go to Home Depot, your value changes. And so what I'm going to try to do is help you better understand what's really going on with the technology behind all this. Phunware is actually a software company, and if we do our job right, ultimately in the world of technology, you'll think there's hardware, there's software, there's firmware, and there's funware. Phunware's name came from applications that exhibit game-like mechanics and behavior. It was a play off the word funware with an F. And the fun side of Phunware was composed of a bunch of folks out of the gaming industry, because you want fun, playful, engaging, addictive experiences, because we want you to be crack addicts on Candy Crush Saga, or we want you addicted to Starbucks, or the University of Nebraska, or whatever your favorite team is. The Ware side of Phunware were what we call the other iOS, folks who specialize in switching and routing, the internet operating system that drives the way all these networks work. And what we do in software is to try to make sense of all this technology so you don't have to worry about it, but we can get anything we want from you or to you whenever we want. And as a father of 4 children, I'll tell you that that's a terrifying proposition. It's even worse because I never had sisters, and I have 3 daughters who are all teenage. And hormones are a new thing in my life that I didn't know. All right, so let's walk through this. What I really want to do is to dive in, and I'm going to make this as high level on the tech side as possible. But for those of you who don't know anything about Phunware, has anyone ever heard of Phunware before you came here today? That's awesome, actually. So I bet all of you have applications that you use that you don't realize are tied to Phunware. So when you watch the Sochi Winter Olympic Games, NBC Sports Live Extra, NASCAR, the National Football League, the CW, Fox, NBC, CBS, Kaiser when you go and stop over to do healthcare treatment. We actually work with the biggest brands in the world, and we're very invisible behind the scenes. As you can imagine, the Fortune 5000 often needs help on new technology. They also don't like to necessarily admit they need help. So we sit very quietly behind the scenes to enable experiences, and we work with a lot of the fun brands in the world. So if you've ever downloaded on mobile the Grammys, the Oscars, WrestleMania, these are all Phunware experiences in either the virtual world or the physical world. And so what I'm going to try to do is walk through how the Fortune 5000 think about this high-value touch point between their brand and these anytime, anywhere audiences. And how do we engage you? How do you manage the scale of 30 million simultaneous users watching a game, as an example? How do you monetize? Because everybody monetizes differently. Facebook theoretically is free, right? Instagram theoretically free. Lots of things are theoretically free, but again, someone is always paying for free. It's either bundled with your cable or satellite. In Candy Crush, it'd be called in-app transactions. In other cases, they are extensions with advertising models or sponsorship models so you can get that experience for free. All right. Phunware is not a social network. We tie into the social fabric of everything going on in social networks, but if we were considered a social network, we reach 600 million active users per month. So for those of you who know about social networks, there's only 4 larger than that in the world, and 3 are owned by Facebook. Messenger, WhatsApp, Facebook itself, and QQ, for those of you familiar with a social network in Asia. And so we get to see a lot of things in 600 million active users per month, as you can imagine. And when we know who you are, where you're at, what you like, what you don't, all of your associations, we can actually triangulate that, give you a unique ID at Phunware, and then be able to hopefully delight you with what it is you really wanted on a one-to-one basis. Some people hate notifications. Others love them. If those of you, anyone like to go to Kohl's, get your Kohl's Bucks as a loyalty program. We actually support and do lots of things on one-to-one marketing. And what I'm going to show you is how marketing automation works through some examples as we walk through this in ways that you probably don't realize are happening, but are happening all the time. So a couple other final things about Phunware. We're the 4th fastest growing company in North America over the last 5 years. And we've been very fortunate to try to go through what I call hypergrowth. From a few founders to a couple hundred people now, probably about $50 million worth of bookings run rate. And we're trying to do like you'd see, raise lots of money, invest, invest, invest. And if we do it right, hopefully we can be one of the world's first publicly traded pure play multi-screen cloud companies in the world. And when we say multi-screen now, we believe, and very differently from what you've maybe heard earlier here, we don't believe in the desktop very much. We actually believe if you have $1 to invest, you should put it in mobile. You should ignore the desktop. That's legacy. It's old. It's going away. We'd also say don't do mobile webs either. We would say start with the applications and work backwards. Forget history and start where you need to, because there's a reason you like Snapchat. There's a reason you like Flipboard and lots of other things, because there was no cash cow. There was no legacy baggage that obligated you or anchored you to make decisions. And one of the biggest things I learned in my time after I was originally an ex-Army Ranger, I was recruited to Silicon Valley to work in the communications space. And when I went out there, I realized very quickly there were two types of companies. There was those comfortable to cannibalize themselves and those that were comfortable allowing other people to cannibalize them. You've seen Apple and Charles Schwab do a good job of cannibalizing themselves. You've seen others. When I was in telephony with a Y, they called it, you watched people who denied the transition of technology waves. When we saw 5 billion feature phones, we knew they were all going in the garbage can. That's not a bridge to the future of technology. That's a forklift. But if you make all your money in the legacy technology, it's very, very, very hard to say, forget that and move over. And therefore, you see what happened with Dell and Microsoft and Cisco and Intel for 10 years of struggling to get back to, mobile, cloud, these things matter. All right. So I don't have to beat a dead horse about the importance of mobile, but just to put it in perspective, when we started Phunware in February of 2009, shortly after the world blew up in the end of 2008 economically, what we found is only 2% of the world's internet traffic was mobile. 2%. Today, 70%. Of that 70%, 90% of it is spent in applications, not browsers. Of that 90% in applications, 90% of that is either free or freemium. And therefore, this idea of how do we know who you are, where you are, what you like, what you don't, gets to be critical. Because in the life cycle of applications, whether those are smartphones, tablets, smart television, wearables, in-car infotainment, they're all just different screens with different memory, horsepower, and resolution. And what we want to do is standardize and reach those everywhere. But what's important to realize is that there shouldn't be debates about mobile first. I think there is not now. When we started, there sure was. The other thing you should know is a couple of dirty secrets. So a couple of dirty secrets we learned very early. One, Apple's hatred and Steve Jobs' hatred of Google and Eric Schmidt and Larry Page was extreme. He felt like Google stole from Apple by being on the board of Apple. Android was created after seeing what was done with iOS. And before he passed away, they set aside a very large war chest to go after Google. Well, if you're going to go after Google, how do you do that? Search. That's where the money comes from. Well, the way you keep Google from shifting from the internet into relevancy on mobile, where the money is you actually make sure you don't use browsers on mobile devices, but you use applications. So they created an app-based ecosystem specifically to keep Google's search capability out of all of those applications, more than 1 million that we all use. For every $1 of value you find in iOS, you get 20 cents, maybe 22 cents at times, Android. Every other operating system, virtually nothing. So when the biggest brands in the world invest, they will invest in applications for the iPhone first, the iPad second, an Android smartphone third, and then they'll usually go back to the iPhone. They may or may not get around to doing an Android tablet. They often will. When they do Microsoft, dirty secret there, nobody invests in Microsoft. None. Except when Microsoft comes to folks like us to have us build the applications on behalf of those big brands, because if you go to download applications, you expect the content you love. So Microsoft's had to subsidize a lot of that. The other thing I'll talk about in the battle between Apple and Google that you should watch is with iOS 9, what came out? Ad blocking technology. But if you look closer, this was step 2 of a big playbook to hurt Google. All the advertising works just fine as long as you're in a native application. Guess where it doesn't work? The browser. The ad blocking technology is about the desktop and the mobile web, and there is no ad blocking as it relates to the applications. And again, these aren't accidental things that are happening. In fact, you don't know that if you go to Safari on your iOS device and you put m.facebook.com, your Facebook will work, but it will be slower at all times than what you do in an application. Why? Because Apple codes it to slow down, so you have a worse experience on purpose. And you say, well, why in the world would they do that? Because when you get frustrated with it, you go to the native application, which magically works better, doesn't it? And again, so this is what's playing on behind the scenes, in addition to just, all the information about the importance of mobile. So when you look at these things and you say, what is native? Native is about coding in Objective-C is the language when you're doing iOS. Java is the language when you're doing Android. Obviously with Windows 10 coming out, Microsoft has a new attempt that they want to use to get the importance of Windows and Office back in all of our hands. And they've had more success recently. But I would suggest to you that if you aren't going to invest in mobile right, you're better off not trying, because all of us are pretty discriminatory as consumers, and we've already seen what good is. Consumers don't care how big your company is or how small. They actually don't care if you're a startup. They don't care if it's your first app, your 1,000th. They just care that it's good. And you usually have about 20 seconds when you hit download and then you launch that application to either captivate the attention or get deleted. Except the stakes now, when you're GameStop, Kohl's, Cabela's in retail, and you get deleted, that is a frightening proposition. So what we're going to do is walk through some of the areas that get to be very relevant on how do you take advantage of the capabilities of all this memory processing power, screen size, resolution, and so on. This is a little hard to see probably in the back, but what this is getting to the idea of outdoor to indoor. So the way you target people is based on technologies. We're all used to GPS because when you're outdoor, you get the blue dot experience of Google and Apple Maps. But when you walk indoors, what happens is you usually go blind. Every application you use virtually goes blind when you walk inside like we are right now. So one of the unique things we looked at is said, well, how do you solve that problem? So Wi-Fi becomes a part of it. There's high density and low density Wi-Fi. So when we access and go to Starbucks and you consent, remember, you're getting free Wi-Fi, right? So is it free? Of course, you consented to get free. So do you anyone read what the terms and conditions say at Starbucks? I can assure you, you're allowing them to get information, not your what's called UDID, which is the device ID for what you carry, but usually a MAC address. Because even though Apple and Google ban applications from capturing the MAC address, for this device, when you go onto a Wi-Fi network, the Wi-Fi chipset, not the application, sends your MAC address to an access point. An access point hits something called a controller, and then a controller goes to a mobility services engine, and ultimately it comes to us. And so when you come indoors, because you're on the Wi-Fi network, we can actually get your MAC address, which is very personal to you. Then when you're logging in with your Cabela's loyalty program, we not only know who you are, but that the 5 devices use the same login, and now we know those 5 devices out of the 600 million are your family. And you can actually touch people in very different ways to give them what they're asking for and what they want. But out here, when you see audience reach, cell towers and GPS has the widest reach outdoors, but it also has the least amount of granularity. So when you want to get down to 1 to 3 feet, I put a beacon right here where I'm standing, and a 1 to 3 foot geofence indoors, all the way down here through Bluetooth. And that's why Apple turns on your Bluetooth every time that you update iOS, even if you turned it off. Because the device needs to communicate with that beacon, which is then going to provide information or social activity. Could be an offer, could be loyalty points, could be very unique to whatever is valuable for you. So you go from these windows from thousands of meters outside. Wi-Fi typically gets, call it 5 to 7 meters, and beacons are 1 to 3 feet. So if you're going through a museum, like we were with the Smithsonian, a guided tour works really well if you can get down to 1 to 3 feet, because you have paintings and statues and all sorts of things that have very, very small footprints. So you always have these trade-offs between the accuracy you can achieve and the reach you can achieve, and you overlay it by whatever happens to be deployed out there. Here at the University of Nebraska, if you're at the football stadium, high-density Wi-Fi is very important because everyone is very concentrated. But when we're in here, you can get away with low-density Wi-Fi. And so all these systems that get deployed are all being done to give elements of this huge circle. And since this is a bit hard to see, the left side of the circle is talking about proximity. Proximity is when you walk into the front of this building, it's accurate enough to know that you walked inside. It also is accurate to know that you walked outside. But if you want positioning, the blue dot experience indoors, you can't have updates every 20 seconds because as you're walking, the blue dot is behind you. And you want the blue dot, like when you're driving in a car, to be exactly where you're at so you can have turn-by-turn wayfinding, navigation, and directions. So a lot of what we do inside locations like this is we look like Apple or Google Maps. So when we sell, the biggest group we sell to on this is healthcare, because the average hospital loses $8 million per year just having the right patient with the right doctor, the right nurse, the right room, the right equipment at the right time. Because if you're not there, that window expires and they did not bill Medicaid or Medicare. And this gets to be extremely expensive for healthcare systems, which are already inherently expensive to begin with. So when you see everything on the left, think about you're using proximity to target people with advertising or marketing messages. On the right, you're trying to go out of your way to find ways to have precision, pinpoint accuracy of what you're doing. So when I'd come in here, I would have an Apple Watch. With my Apple Watch, it would vibrate and give me turn-by-turn directions as I'm going through different parts of the student union. These are the kind of experiences that you can set up, and that gets to be critically important. So as we were talking about the size of these and how these get applied in the real world, these are enablers, because at the end of the day, you have to understand that every brand wants to know you individually. They want to know what you like and don't like, and they want to give you what you're asking for in real time. They also know that 20% of their customers represent 80% of their revenue, so they want to discriminate. They want to treat you better at a hotel if you're there 100 days a year than if you're there 2 days a year. That's just the reality. So we're talking about pricing. We get price discriminated against every day of our lives. All of us do. Think about just trying to get an airfare or a hotel. Based on the time of day you do it, whether there's a lot of demand, there's not demand, they're trying to price gouge, they're trying to give you a deal. This happens even in fantasy sports betting. Most sports betting doesn't care about the outcome. They just want an equal number of dollars bet on both sides to take a commission out of the middle. So if you understand the behaviors of what's in it for the companies on one side, what's in it for you on the other, then you can start taking advantage of all this technology to get into some really pinpoint, accurate targeting. So location-based services, you see a small picture here, but we've all used mapping outdoors and we've all gotten very used to it. How many of you use mapping indoors? One couple? Right. So this is a brand new area that you're going to see amazing innovation inside. Because everything you came accustomed to outside, we want to do inside. And it gets very, very complicated once you get indoors. Because when you're thinking about how intrusive advertising can be on your experience when you're saying, I want to consume content, this is even more pronounced because we're trying to collect data with an X, a Y, and a Z coordinate. Not just the blue dots on this building, but I'm on the second floor, the third floor, I'm on the stage, I'm sitting in the crowd, and we're trying to capture these events indoors and outdoors in real time for targeting and triggering. So far we've built a database of about 40 billion user events. It grows at about 4 billion events per month. And you're trying to figure out, imagine what do you keep track of or what don't you? It gets to be an overwhelming concept of big data to be able to crunch all this data to feed you the best offers, the best marketing message, the most likely loyalty programs, and so on and so forth. So when we go through this, the next big evolution is location-based marketing. Now, all of you have probably seen Constant Contact come in email. You've probably had Pardot or Eloqua or Responses, the Oracle and Salesforce pieces. A lot of this you now treat like spam, right? Everything is an email. It bugs the hell out of you. It's got 1% to 2% open rates. You get annoyed because you don't know how you got on the list. You try to opt out of the list, which gets you on 20 more lists. And it is a perpetual thing. Marketo is another one of these that you would see in rapid fire succession. But again, all of those technologies were legacy, right? So that was all based on the internet. It was all based on HTML. It was what's called asynchronous, meaning they're just sending you an email and they're hoping you get to it at some point. That isn't exactly as valuable to a brand as me knowing you're standing in aisle 7 in front of the Lucky Charms box, and Procter & Gamble or somebody else can instantly give you exactly an offer while you're staring at that box. So what we're doing is to start taking context, overlaying it with location, figuring out who you are, where you're at, what you're doing, what you like and don't, and then give you a specific message that's explicitly for what your interest is. And that gets to be rather complex. Okay. So when you think about advertising, targeting, what was unique about the internet is they had these things called cookies, right? And so they would follow you everywhere. And God forbid you ever hit an adult entertainment site, then it got really bad, right? All of a sudden these things are following you everywhere and pop-ups are going everywhere. People get embarrassed, they're doing the wrong thing at work, you name it. But what happens in mobile is there are no cookies. There are no ways to track in a traditional way. When you think about Nielsen and you hear about television ratings, or ComScore, or Omnichannel, and you think about internet ratings, if you don't know, all they're really doing is taking a very small sample in a metropolitan area, running it through a bunch of algorithms, and providing an estimate with a panel of audience viewership. In mobile, you don't have to do this ever. You don't need to estimate anything. We know who you are, where you're at, what you're doing, and you're providing that information to us in real time. So why guess? Why estimate? It's probably as bad when we're talking about newspapers. If you had an advertisement in a newspaper, okay, subscribership is 3 million. How many people on that day of the 3 million got the paper? Of those that got it, how many of them opened it? Of those that opened it, how many of them got to the section where your advertisement was at? Even if they got to the page where it's at, how many of them looked at it? These are almost impossible things to answer, like driving by a billboard. So it has an effect somewhere, but it's not always completely clear. So here's proximity messaging. Now let's walk through the workflow of this. Okay, so we talked about Bluetooth being a trigger, so they put a beacon inside of an end cap at a store display. When you walk in, and let's say you went into a Kohl's or Cabela's, and you actually have the Kohl's or Cabela's application, it's going to instantly trigger as you walk by that proximity and pop up information. In this case, it's giving you a customized offer because they know your purchasing patterns and behavior. And what they're trying to do is incent you to take actions that may already be in your interest. So when you receive this message in real time, you can take action in real time. And now analytics is no longer about, hey, show me a report what happened last week, today. This is literally in real time, where you can now have a marketing team sitting, watching the behavior in live traffic in and out of the store, and actually doing engagement on a one-to-one basis based on what you're doing. Obviously, this can get pretty creepy if you don't like it, right? It's gotten to a point where certain retailers have had to stop because they've recognized you through proximity that you walked in the door. They triggered it to one of the retail associates, and because they know it's you, they know Alan Knitowski is now at Nordstrom. I walk up, and someone walks right up to me and says, hello, Mr. Knitowski, good to see you today. Can I help you? You may either really appreciate that, or that may scare the living hell out of you, right? So what the technology can do is so far beyond what human behavior may want it to do that this is where we take an interesting approach. Empower everyone with everything, put you in control of your applications and what you want, the frequency, and don't try to guess on behalf of anyone. Because no one gets upset if you're giving them something they ask for. Where they get upset is where you're either trying to trick them, or whether you're trying to use information that they may or may not know you have to be able to have a personal dialogue. So there's a very fine line on both sides. In Europe, this would be different than the US because we're wildly more open with our information in the United States than the way privacy laws work in Europe. All right, so let's take another look. The omnichannel purchase. So when we talk about the physical world and the real world, you see this sort of ping pong back and forth. The ideal thing you might want to do is meet someone in a virtual audience. Like, let's say I'm a fan of World Wrestling Entertainment. I've got the WWE over-the-top application on my device, and they want to interface with me. Well, I'm a virtual guy right now because I'm not at any WWE event. I'm not at Raw or WrestleMania. So there's times where you're in the virtual world consuming brands or content of things you love. There's other times where you're at AT&T Stadium watching the Dallas Cowboys game or the Taylor Swift concert because you're physically on site. So this idea of what you do when you're physically somewhere or not gets to be relevant. In this case, this is somebody that has been shopping online. They found things that they like. They abandoned something in their shopping cart. But of course, the brand knows that they abandoned that purchase online. So then when they get close enough to a store, because they have the application, it triggers a message to incent them to come in. And oh, by the way, there just happens to be a special on that item you abandoned online. And if you stop, for every hand that goes up, every call that comes in right now, you're going to get, that great Ganga deal. So what happens is this is the way you can go back and forth to incent the person to stop, to come into the store, and get full attribution at retail point of sale. And because you bought as well, here's 10% off your next purchase on top as a thank you. So this gets to be very, very powerful. And I will tell you from all the retailers we work with, I can tell you that Target was killing people months and months and months before Wall Street. Why? Because I can look at all the data coming in real time and see the level of activity and the conversions and how Target behaves versus Walmart, how TJ Maxx behaves versus Kohl's, how GameStop behaves versus Walmart. And you can see the level of activity and what's working and what isn't. And so when you don't have that wonderful, beautiful native application experience, you get upset users. When they get upset and they don't engage, you're losing your customers. And if you look at the troubles of Macy's and Sears versus the amazing successes of Target, I can tell you there's no accident about any of this. It's because those that get their mobile application portfolios right are winning, and anyone else who is not getting it right is losing. And they're losing share to each other. All right. So when we go through this, we try to come up with a way for very large brands to make sense out of all this. And the way that we did this, we started with mobile as a service, and we evolved it to multiscreen as a service because only smartphones existed when we started Phunware, and along came all the other categories of devices. What I would suggest to you is that all devices, not just the smartphones and the tablets, but the new version of smart television, already you're seeing it in wearables, already you're seeing it in in-car systems like Apple AirPlay. Everything is going to look like iOS and Android. Everything is going to look like iOS and Android. And so what you're finding is that, ironically, those big, beautiful flat screen televisions we have with the greatest picture have the crappiest interface, right? You have this miserable smart television where you're trying to go in through their Wi-Fi access to the internet. And I literally have my kids walk up and go like this. Daddy, it's broke. Can we get a new one? Because they're so trained on all the devices that they don't understand why the television isn't swiping correctly. And so when we were talking earlier before lunch, I guess, about all the changes in millennials, I watched this with great admiration to see how kids, who are ruthless, by the way, the younger they are, the more they have no filter, the more they're ruthless about what garbage it is that they're interfacing with and how much we need to get rid of it. And that is very interesting because we're all starting to behave, even us old guys like me with the gray hair too, you start seeing these behaviors and you change. Your tolerance for mediocrity is just not there. You're like, you don't value my money? Guess what? Someone else will. My wife would drive an extra 8 miles to get to Costco before going to a Walmart. Just because she's like, you value me this little? Goodbye. That's an expensive proposition when you got a household of 6 spending the way that we're doing. So what we tried to do is to take this and do something that no one had ever done. Every company in every one of these boxes were funded with tens of millions of dollars by Silicon Valley to just do analytics or alerts, content management, location-based services. Because what is everybody taught to believe? Do one thing, do it better than everyone else in the world, and you're going to dominate that field. except mobile doesn't work that way, and multiscreen doesn't work that way. What people actually need are everything that was built from day one that was meant for mobile, that was all fully integrated, and it all plays nicely together. What we've found from doing about 500 application portfolios for the biggest brands in the world at scale, and when I say scale, I mean we're doing over 1 trillion transactions a year in support of these staggering live events. And when you see that, you realize that the application experience is only as good as the weakest link within it. And what happens, remember, any of you remember by chance like watching the college football playoffs last year and you could only watch it through the applications and they crashed? So imagine, how much did ESPN spend to buy the digital rights for the college playoff system? And then what happens, we've seen it at the London Olympic Games. We became, a customer of ours became NBC Sports because they risked $1 billion of advertising for the Olympic Games in London, with a B, $1 billion. They spent $500 million on the digital rights, $1 billion from Coca-Cola, American Express, IBM, McDonald's. How many times do you think you get to embarrass those brands on the scale of the Olympics before something might change, right? All at once. So in that case, we actually had Adobe became a customer of ours as a make good to NBC, and they hated us and didn't want us to be a customer. So imagine how fun that is. A customer that hates you. But they hated us because we had to forklift everything they built to do the Sochi Winter Olympics. And only after the Sochi Winter Olympics went off with 0.01% downtime on the biggest audience in history, then we invoiced NBC for the first time. So there's a lot of very interesting things that go on in this. But this bottom level, there's do-it-yourselfers. Think of you guys are great bakers and you need a lot of toolkits. And we'll just say that the cake you're making are called applications. So if you're a great baker, we can give you all the ingredients, and either you, your IT team, your agency of record, or a third party can build these wonderful experiences on your behalf. But you get standardization and consistency across all of them. Now, we also found what we call the off-the-shelfers. The ones that say, you know what, I don't want to learn how to bake cake, but I like to eat it. So can you please give me a solution? So we created pre-integrated solutions for physical venues. So now if you go to Dallas-Fort Worth Airport, Fort Lauderdale, Miami, Calgary, Toronto, those are all Phunware venues. We do hundreds of malls across the country, hundreds of hospitals, huge stadiums, hundreds of thousands of luxury condominium residencies. And so the goal was to say, if we can meet you in the virtual world, if we can meet you in the physical world, or if you can standardize on these, you can then create the world's biggest database with an ID for every single connected device in the world. And then you can target people on a one-to-one basis. So hopefully you're getting something you like more that you've selected to opt in or opt out of, even though we started this with the privacy thing to show you how your life's being tracked and you voluntarily did it without knowing. You do have the right to clear all that history. Just hit the clear history button and turn it off if you don't want to be tracked. All right. So when you think about the scale opportunities of this, it's always trade-offs. When you want to reach the masses, you want to use technologies and other things that are going to get as wide and as broad as possible around the world. But the reality is, when you're trying to do things one-to-one, you have to get very, very granular. So when we were talking, I think in an earlier session, there was discussions about making amazing applications. You can make the most amazing application in the world, just like you can make the best car in the world. But if nobody knows it exists, it's not likely to succeed. So it's just as important not only to do what I call the strategery part of it, what OS, what platform, what device, what use cases, what feature sets. Who am I trying to reach? What kind of delightful experience am I trying to provide? Once you do that, then you have to have someone build it. But most importantly, once you build anything, you have to facilitate discovery. And when there's more than 1 million applications on the iOS store, hundreds of thousands on Android, or even what they're putting up, tens of thousands with Microsoft, someone out there has to find you. So a lot of the work we'll do at times are application installs. So you might say, wow, you're working with Coles over here and you're working with King on Candy Crush Saga. What does that have to do with each other? What it has to do with is the same demographic. So the average Kohl's user, who's a power user, is 65 years old, white, retired in the United States. Ironically, that's the exact demographic of Candy Crush Saga. Same one. Just like NASCAR and WWE, pretty much the same audience. So when you can see all these things, what it allows you to start doing is we have lots of brands who come, and if you want to make sure you have successful applications, you have to invest in them with marketing just the way you do anything else. So we'll have folks that will come, and King may spend $4 per install to get a new free user. So how do you scale $4 per install for free users? Because they know that of every 100 users that they pay for, there's going to be 2 to 4 of those users will buy the in-application purchases, and the entire King business model works because 2 to 4 people out of every 100 that download it for free get addicted. And we're Americans, we're impatient. You know, by God, you're not going to make me wait 30 minutes before I go after the next level. And so they pay for the right to do it. So we see the monetization work in interesting ways, but every single brand should know what is the value of a free user. So when we work with someone like Kohl's or Cabela's, we can show them definitively, here's how much you should spend for free installs, and you should rinse, lather, and repeat that until it's no longer a 2-quarter return on investment that you're going to get the lifetime value of that user back through commerce. And who's great at this are gaming companies, and every other vertical is amazingly poor at this. So if you go back and you want to sit down and say, what's the average free newspaper user? There's certain groups that would know that for offline, online, but then when you start getting into why should I pay $2, $3, or $4 to get the next free user on my newspaper or the next user of my application for GameStop, you have to be able to get a closed loop to figure that out. So 2 quick case studies, because numbers are everything. We did this actually, we're going to do it again this coming quarter. Fourth quarter is always a great thing. Last year it was the largest amount of mobile commerce in the history of the world. This year is going to be substantially bigger than it was last year. So one of the ways you figure these things out, you start doing case studies. In this case, we actually said, how do we drive people to a store, and what can we do to facilitate online commerce? So what we tried to do here is actually send out notifications to application users, specifically incent them to go online and buy. And we could actually go through and get down to, in this case, a 14% conversion rate, and you could quantify the amount of commerce that was generated. So now you can start doing the math to go along with saying, why do I do this? So remember back when I said the legacy things were email, 1 to 2% open rates, and then a very small conversion rate. This was something where you're actually getting a 14% conversion rate with open rates exceeding 90%. Why? Because on mobile, what happens when you hear that little ding or that little vibration? We're all like little crack addicts, right? You immediately go to it. You stare, must clean out the bubble, so there's no messages on my bubble, right? And so we get very high open rates because you think it's a text message. Now, this one is even scarier. So earlier we were talking about things like Tinder, right? User experiences and all these dating apps, right? This idea that we did was another set of case studies. This is called geo-conquesting. But that's why I jokingly say this isn't like geo-conquesting like Tinder or dating sites. That's a different kind of geo-conquesting. This is a term, have anyone even heard of the term geo-conquesting? How many of you have heard of this before? No one. Fantastic. This is the way that you enable one-to-one interactions at levels that are unprecedented. And it's something that is so unique that most of our customers that use this don't want anyone in the world to know this even exists. They don't want you to know their customers or anything else. But what you do is this. We'll use Kohl's. I am Kohl's. And you walk into TJ Maxx or Target or Walmart. So what we do is you put a geofence around every single Kohl's store in the United States. Then you put geofences around every one of your competitors' stores simultaneously. Because once you have your device and you have a Kohl's application on it, and where's it at? It's in your pocket because it never leaves you. You start walking around while your location is on. You have the application on. So as you walk into TJ Maxx, Kohl's goes, uh-oh, they're going to a competitive store. So what we do is we enable an instant message that incents you right now to stop in your tracks, walk out of TJ Maxx, get in your car, drive to Kohl's, go inside, take the offer, and have full attribution at retail point of sale. And so these conversion, 18 to 40%, that is people being set notices going into a competitor's store, stopping in their tracks, getting in their car, driving to the other store, going in and buying the offer because they only had a 60 to 90 minute window to go get that offer before it expired. So think about that. Over 90% open rate and 20 to 40% conversion at retail. That's frightening. Now imagine you don't have this. The other thing you also see is you can collect an amazing amount of competitive intelligence, and your users become the ones collecting it for you in real time on every store they go. Where do I go? How many times do I go to Target versus Walmart versus GameStop? How much time do I spend when I'm in there? And they can feed all these and say, how do our stores perform versus theirs? And this is what the next generation of one-to-one targeting for either marketing and advertising looks like. It's the same methodology of how you use geofences indoors and outdoors, and it allows you to accomplish things in ways that have really never been possible before. So there's lots of thoughts on all these things, and the biggest thing that I've learned through this is if you're a brand, you want to enable your consumers, your channel partners, and your employees to do whatever they want, whenever they want, wherever they're at. You have right brain, left brain. You have power users, visual users. Support them all at the same time. And let them self-select the elements of what they need, what they don't, what they like, what they don't, and delight them. Engage them with what they want to be engaged with. Incent them to do it. Have an easy way to management, and then allow the monetization to take care of itself. Because if you fail with the engagement, they'll leave. But what we found through this is that when you give huge amounts of value, we've seen the average Phunware applications, people spend 5 times the amount of time of other applications. Why? Because it's self-learning. After a while, you can start understanding what people like and don't, and you can showcase content. You can showcase things that might be of interest, offers, and you're doing it in a way that's not trying to freak them out. You're doing it in a way where you're empowering them to be in charge of turning things on or off. And the reason I wanted you all to see that to kick this thing off was so that you know you ultimately are in control, but you have to understand what you're in control of. Because the ecosystem that's out there has to figure out how to make money at this. Otherwise, free isn't going to work. We can all be upset over and over and over again that, oh my God, I have to watch this video pre-roll. Well, that's easy. You can pay for it, and you get the game because you paid for it. But that's how it has to work usually. All right? So with that, I think that's probably a good segue into questions.
I think it is. And in fact, the way we'll probably do this right now is, if you could, Retha, just hold that question. We're right at the point where it would be good for us to break, and those who want to go to talk about immersive virtual reality for mobile devices, immersive virtual reality 360 video, that will start in 10 minutes in Regency BC. And programming for wearables starts in 10 minutes in Regency A. And then the questions continue here with Retha and Andrew. Andrew Haig and Retha Hill. Retha is the director of the Innovation Lab at Arizona State University. Andrew Haig